So as a society, we are all obsessed about fantasies. And I'm sure everyone in the room has their own share of private fantasies as well. What I seem to want to tell you today is that I think one such fantasy that a lot of us share is about to come true. It's a fantasy of a 4-day work week as against the present reality of a 5-day work week. Now, when I say that it's actually going to become a reality, what am I basing it on? It's actually happening around the world, and where all it is happening. It's happening informally. A lot of working mothers are renegotiating the terms with their employers so that they can have a lot more flexible options in terms of doing it. People who are echelons of higher up in the management hierarchy, the CEOs and the top management, they're actually renegotiating the terms with the employers. One such person, Ivan, who's actually the CEO of a wealth management firm, is taking every Monday off so that he can spend time with his granddaughter. But these are informal arrangements. Is there areas in which this is happening formally? Now that is a very interesting observations and experiments are also happening across the world. Now one such experiment is the format called as the compressed workweek. So in the compressed workweek format, what is happening is people who used to work typically 40 hours a week are working 4 days at a rate of 10 hours a day. So cumulatively, you're still working 40 hours, but at the same time, you have your Fridays free to yourself. And where all it's happening, it's happened in Utah. And it's interestingly, in 2008, it's the Utah state government employees that actually tried it out. Uniqlo, a fashion retail giant in China, they actually offered this particular benefit to 10,000 of their workers at the retail firms. They can work 40 hours and take a day off. The caveat there was they used to have to work on the weekends. Then we also have KPMG among the larger employers. We have KPMG offering this offer to some of its US employees as well. So it's also happening formally. A more interesting experiment is happening in the startup world. There's a company called 37 Signals and there's another company called Treehouse, both startups in US. And 37 Signals is one of those firms which actually sort of changed the dynamics in which startups work and view technology. What they have done is far more interesting, is that they've cut down to 32 hours a week, which means you still work 8 hours a week, but you only work 4 days a week. And in 37 Signals, the way they've implemented it is every employee, every team member who has crossed 1 year, they get to do it, avail this option during their summer vacation time, during the summers. And in Treehouse, how it's happened is it's happening across the year. Throughout the year, any team member, 32 hours flat. So this is actually happening. These experiments are really happening. And what's been the results of those experiments is what is most fascinating. In all these experiments, the formal ones, both in the 40-hour scenario and the 32-hour scenario, people started seeing productivity really go up. Other benefit aside, people were happier, people had time to manage their personal lives, people commuted less, it was good on the environment, a lot of other factors aside, the productivity actually started going up. And it was marginal in the 40-hour scenario, the increase in productivity, whereas it was substantial in the 32-hour scenario, which again is something which people didn't really expect to come out of it. Even the people who sort of implemented didn't expect to see this happening. So what exactly is turning out? So effectively, what that is turning out to be is that the same set of people who were asked to work 5 days, 40 hours, the same set of people delivered far better output and far more output when they're asked to work lesser number of hours, and that is 32 hours. Now this is contrary to whatever we thought about productivity as well. And now why is this happening? It's happening because the information work does not work like a manufacturing work. In fact, on the contrary, so the typical analogy is that more number of hours results in more number of productive output. But in the creative economy, it's even to be noted that increase in number of hours might actually even be detrimental to productivity. So where is this coming from? This 40-hour work week is actually a relic from the information age. From the information age, the 40-hour work week came into a policy, and since then we've sort of transported it into the information age as well, from the manufacturing to information age as well. And the same relics we're actually seeing across various other sectors. So the way we can see it is in the design of the cubicle. So this is one such area. So the design of the cubicle, when we started our information technology offices in India, was actually designed by the design principles of the shop floor, where the cubicles in which we are looking at 4 different directions, we're not looking at each other, we're not allowed to talk, or it's rather very incredibly difficult to talk to each other, right? And that's whole design, the room space, the space for each employee was designed according to our wing room of our arms. So basically all the design principles from the factory shop floor was how it was first designed. How does it look right now? The 21st century office, the workplace, looks very different. It's vibrant, it's graffitis. It's a lot more people talking to each other. It's people facing each other. It's a lot more free spaces, a lot more open spaces, beanbags. And you see something more starting interesting is the attire in 2 scenarios. In the first scenario, the attire is actually very formal. Formal clothes, tight clothing, well-groomed, tucked in. In this particular scenario, people are wearing chappals, people are wearing t-shirts, jeans, flying hair, whatnot. Now, in the manufacturing age, it did make sense to have such a dress code, because if you don't have tight clothing, if you have hair and everything falling around, when you're operating in a shop floor where there's heavy machinery, the possibility of a health hazard is real. And in this particular information age, the only heavy machinery you typically sort of actually operate is a coffee machine, right? So this is the reality, and that's how it's happening. So this actually is a picture of the coffee area from Evernote, which again is one of the fantastic companies actually redefining the way work has to happen, redefine a lot of things about productivity. And what is interesting to note in all these design principles is what has changed. The same parameter is used, increasing employee productivity. But in this scenario, what they're trying to increase is not the cubic foot area or the minimized cubic foot area, it's they're increasing employee interaction, team interaction. The entire design principle is around that. In this particular example, the person who's actually standing in front of the coffee machine is a senior VP of the organization. In this particular organization, there is a mandated rule that every senior VP of the organization, every senior management person has to tend to the coffee machine 1 hour on a cycle. And they are the ones who are actually offering you the coffee. In the first edition, we had self-coffee machine vendings. In this edition, the iteration, we have people who are senior management people vending coffee machines. Why? That actually facilitates a more informal, structured way of interacting with people and sharing knowledge. So all these ways were extremely fascinating. And before I get to the 20%, so one thing I wanted to say was that, so anyway, this particular reality of a 4-day work week is almost here. And why do I say that? It's say that we actually take a look at a lot of these trends. A lot of people are opting for it. Research reports say that millennials want a lot more time. All of us want that. And eventually, we realize that it doesn't sort of make sense. The holy grail of how work world was structured was something called as a bell curve. Anybody who's ever worked has faced the consequences or the vagaries of the bell curve, a forced ranking system. Very recently, last week, Infosys announced that they are getting rid of the bell curve system, and they said that they are seeing far better improvement in employee morale and employee retention. Accenture CEO announced in an interview that it didn't make sense. You can't really do that. You can't compare the productivity of someone working in Bangalore to someone working in New York. And this is something every employee and every manager who has been doing this for the last 10 years has been saying this over and over again. So things that didn't make sense, yes, it never made sense, it still doesn't make sense. We never had a better way, there had to be a better way, there will be a better way. So in the same line, I am hypothesizing that this 4-day work week is almost around the corner. And I'll also let you know, I don't know when it's going to happen or how it's going to happen, but effectively it's going to happen and it's going to look something like this. So I used to travel, so there was a year, or probably even 2 years, in which every travel of mine in a IRCTC, the Indian Railways train, carried a 50 rupee fine. I consistently kept paying the fine again and again for all those 2 years. You know what the reason was? That is the time when they implemented IRCTC and encouraged people to book online. I was happy. I was one of the people who encouraged technology. I started booking online, but the rule said that if you don't have a printed ticket, you have to pay 50 rupee fine. It didn't sort of make sense to me. The SMS comes to my thing. The only thing that is there is the same SMS on the train number. But every time I tried arguing with the inspector, came back and said, no, you have to pay the fine. And something very interesting happened. After a certain point of time, when I actually logged into IRCTC, a pop-up shouts into my face, Please consider the environment before printing your ticket. And I was like, anyway, so eventually, what's going to happen is, in a similar manner, the organizer is going to come and tell you, you know what, I think it's great for us and you and all that we shift to a 4-day work week. And you'll be like, hey, we've been saying that all along, right? So anyway, it's eventually going to happen. The research is not conclusive yet. The research sort of says that it's going to be somewhere around 30 hours is optimal productivity in the 21st century. So it's only going to be a matter of time before the research gets the word out. But again, research also has not concluded that working lesser hours is actually having any impact on the total output. And if you look at countries who are actually working less number of hours, the output is comparably the same. So anyway, the research is going to be delayed. But what I do know for sure is experiments like what Jason and all is doing is going to be adopted by a lot more companies for whatever reason. Maybe they really do care. Maybe they use it as a way to attract more talent. Maybe they want to use it as retaining employees, but it's definitely going to happen. Now my question is, are you going to sit around and wait till it happens? Or are you going to take advantage of it and move forward? Are you going to get ahead of the curve and sort of make it happen? Now to make it happen, there are very simple ways. One, start taking all your Fridays off. Just like that. Start taking all your Fridays off. Gift yourself that 20%, right? So that's a starting thing. Second, if you want to, and if you can, go back and renegotiate with your organization, with your manager, right? People have done that. And in the first instance, when you actually get yourself the extra time, the Friday, what immediately happens is your weekend time goes up by 50%. And your work time goes down by 20%. And in reality, your pay is not going to come down. Even if you take all the leaves, it's not going to come down more than 10%. Why? Because the pay scale is not calculated on the number of days, but it's actually calculated in the total number of days in a month. So effectively, you skip the 5th day, the company still pays you 10%. That's how the math works out in your favor. And for people in the higher bracket, in the 30% bracket, the number is even lower. Because some of it, 30% of it is actually taken by the government as well. So you're actually better off not working the 5th day. So now the more interesting question. So we have 20% extra time. The question is, what do we really do with this 20%, right? Now we heard a lot of 20%, and I'm going to want to tell you that this 20% can be amazingly fascinating. There's something called Pareto law. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of it, 80-20 principle. 80% of your results are created by 20% of your efforts. Going by that analogy, 20% is a lot. And going by anybody who has actually appeared for any engineering or any examination in the system to award a degree, they really know that 20% is all it takes to actually get your degree. And we all are living examples of the particular scenario. Let's actually go back and take a look at where this has been implemented, the 20% rule. So Google is one of the companies who is rated and regarded as one of the most employer-friendly companies in the world, right? And they had an instituted policy which said that there is a 20% rule. People, every employee of the company is expected to work on a project of their own choosing. It doesn't matter what project it is. It need not even matter that it's aligned to the company. Whatever they want to do, please feel free to do it. It was mandated that they do have a 20% project, right? What came out of it? The person and that picture wearing the white coat, you may not know him by face, but how many of you have heard of Orkut? This is the founder of Orkut, right? He is an employee of Google. That was his 20% project. He did it as a school project. While he was studying, he came into Google, he picked it up, brushed it up, and that changed the way we communicate and we engage with the world. Similarly, what other 20% came out of Google? The AdSense, the economic engine that powers the entire Google machinery, the advertising income, the revenue generating machinery was created by a 20% project, right? And that also went and redefined the way advertising works. Last but not the least, Gmail. The one email system that sort of powers the way and changes the dynamics in which we use email was again a 20% project. So 20% can actually be a lot. So on that particular thing, I would really like to encourage you to actually go back and use the same principle. Pick up a 20% project which actually makes interesting sense to you. No other filter. It should be interesting to you, that's it. Let it be anything else. Me, I picked up board games as my 20% project. And suddenly, when you are exposed to this particular reality, you will struggle to realize what you really want to do. I struggle with it. Everyone wants to do something interesting. But when really asked, what is that I want to do, we've not really put any thought into it. So it's time to take that Friday off and make that your first 20% project. Sit and think, what is that you want to do, so that we can actually make our world, play a part in making the world a better place. You want to see some improvement in yourself or the world? Make that your 20% project. It took me 3 months to decide on board games. It took me another 3 months to decide on which board games to buy. And today, religiously, every Friday, I play board games with a bunch of people that I invite. So that's particular about it. And in conclusion, what is really required is actually a cultural shift. A cultural shift in terms of the way we think about all these things as well, right? The world has changed. We are in the 21st century. We need a new set of attitudes and beliefs and cultures which are aligned to the realities and the possible 21st century. We need a culture and an attitude in which we can go out and change things and try things. We need a culture which encourages sharing and pay it forward. Because we can, because that's how it's supposed to be, and because we care. At the heart of an entrepreneurship is the art of problem solving. And problem solving, all of us can say that there are tons of problems that need solving in the world. And all of us also know that unless and until we commit resources to a problem, it never gets solved. The biggest resource, the most critical resource in any startup is the entrepreneur, is the person. Is the amount of time and effort he or she is willing to commit to the problem creates the most result, right? People create solutions. People get things done. Our effort and our objective and our responsibility as society is to be creating the policies and the cultural practices that enables and really encourages the people to make it easier to pursue their own projects, the problems that they want to work on at a time of their choosing, and that is our responsibility. And we all need to change our attention to a lot more problems that we really need to take a look at. On that note, there's a note which, the comment which Chris Gopalakrishnan, who's the chief mentor of Startup Village, came and told us, we started enforcing a room this size, it's your turn now. All of us, when we started doing something, we were clueless. It's part of the equation. You first take your time out and start figuring it out. At the end of the day, the question I want to ask and leave you here with is, what is your 20%? The 4-hour workday, the 4-day work week is around the corner. Are you ready with your 20%? Great. And every day, every morning, before you go to sleep, keep asking the question, what's my 20%? Thank you.